The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
Let's all bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we humble ourselves before you, and we ask, God, that you would turn your eyes on us, that you would look at us today, Lord, with tender, loving kindness on this day that we've set aside for love. We thank you that your presence is here. We know that you're always with us. You promise never to leave us or to forsake us. And now, God, we ask that you would help us to do the things that we cannot do for ourselves. I ask, Lord, that your kingdom would come and that you would rule and reign in authority, that you would fill our hearts and motivate our activities. Lord, help us to respond to your promptings and give us the ability to be able to discern your thoughts and the ideas that are coming from you. Work in us to do your will and to do your good pleasure. Lord, I ask that you would bring forth godly and righteous judgments, and that your wisdom would rule and your divine order would fall into place. Grant us insight to govern righteously. I pray, Lord, over the individuals, the personal lives of each representative that's here today, and to all those, Lord, for all those that are serving in the House. Today, especially, God, I ask that you would blanket each one of them in your love, that you would divinely protect them, that you would keep them safe and their families, and that you would help them to be strong and healthy. Help them, Lord, to listen to each other, to respect each other, to work in harmony on behalf of all Minnesotans. Lord, I thank you that when we stand praying, we can believe that we receive and that we have the petitions of our heart. And so we thank you now for hearing us. We thank you for acting on our behalf. In your precious holy name we pray. Amen.
The chaplain for today is the Reverend Eileen Blanche, retired from Rivers of Living Water Church, Lake City, Minnesota. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing while we recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 88th session, 2013, 13th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Wednesday, February 13, 2013.
If there's no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Reports of standing committees and divisions. A copy of this order of business has been placed on each member's desk. If there is no objection, the reports will be adopted.
Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker?
Yes, Representative Scott.
Yes, I'd like to reject the report from the Civil Law Committee from yesterday, February 13th.
Okay.
And I'd like a roll call.
Representative Scott, just to clarify, this is a report that was acted on by civil law yesterday that's in the current reports?
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I didn't hear exactly what you said.
Can you state the bill number for us, for the front desk?
Yeah, the House File 84.
Okay.
So, Representative Scott, how I'd like to proceed, if it's okay with you, is to adopt all the other reports, excluding that one, and then we'll take up that issue if that works for you.
That'll be fine, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Okay, so the motion then before the body is to accept the reports of standing committees and divisions on your desk with the exception of House File number 84. If there's no objection to that motion, the reports are adopted. Now to House File 84. So the motion before the body then is a motion of... Okay. So can you restate your motion then, Representative Scott?
My motion is to reject the report from the Civil Law Committee on House File 84. That would, I think it was going to be referred to the Committee on Public Safety.
And you did request a roll call, so are there 15 hands for a roll call? Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, House File 84 was rushed through yesterday, the Civil Law Committee, and pretty much an unbalanced amount of time was spent for the proponents of the bill. There were several members of the public that were in attendance. They were not allowed to have their voices heard. They drove some distance to testify on this bill, and they were not allowed to be heard. And I want to implore everyone in this room that we had a long discussion Monday night about transparency and giving the public maximum exposure to what took place down here in the legislature. And I don't think that the actions didn't align with what words were spoken on Monday night. And so I would like to request that the bill stay in civil law, and that it be some more hearings, have another hearing on the bill.
Yes.
So members, just to clarify, the order of business before the body is on the adoption of the committee report on House File number 84. Voting, eventually after the discussion when we vote on it, if you vote yes, it's to adopt the report and move it on to the next committee. If you vote no, it's to not adopt the report, in which case it'll go back to the Civil Law Committee. So just so everybody's clear on that point. So Representative Lesch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and Representative Scott. I know the bill looked like it was rushed through, and I offer the members on the committee my apologies for looking the way it did. It was not handled in the way it should have been, and the appearance was one that will be remedied in subsequent stops. I will add, I'm not sure if everyone felt they didn't have adequate time. I know Representative Howe clocked in at 27 minutes on his questions, which were good questions, absolutely. And other members of the committee did not have an opportunity to ask the questions that they wanted to ask, and they should have been. I will only add, in defense of the bill and in asking for a green vote, that the questions that were being asked were appropriate to the next stops on the committee, specifically Ag Environment. Those are the questions, that's the area of the bill that most people wanted to ask about, and we gave the time that we did for an exposition of the bill, not as simply proponents, but to explain the bill, to the extent that proponent testimony outweighed the time given by the opponents. I believe that will absolutely be remedied in the multiple subsequent stops in the committee, and I think that those will be the appropriate places for those specific questions to be asked as well. So I offer my apology to those members that were offended by the way it was handled. That's not the way we'll run business in my committee. But I do ask for a green vote and the opportunity. And I did speak with other opponents afterwards and give them individual time and attention to address their concerns, and said that I apologize for them having to drive in to the extent they did, and ask that they would attend the subsequent meetings where their concerns could be appropriately vetted. So I ask members for a green vote.
Representative Pugh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am rising in support of the remarks that Representative Scott made. I am a member of the Civil Law Committee and was just deeply disappointed with the manner in which House File 84 was jammed through the committee against the will of the people. I was shaken to have witnessed the rushing of this bill and the rubber stamping of the approval without the opposition having the time to speak. There were several who didn't have an opportunity at all, and they had signed up. There were several who spoke and were quickly cut off and told that there wasn't time, that they needed to quickly wrap up their remarks. And there was one who was told that, excuse me, but this is the Civil Law Committee, and what you are speaking to is not germane to civil law. Afterwards, and before I move on, the opposition was not held to that same standard, and that was disappointing to me as well. They spoke to issues well outside the parameters of civil law. Afterwards, I too spoke with all of the testifiers and those who had hoped to testify. One woman in particular was visibly shaken, and I apologized to her. She told me that this was her first time to the Capitol. She told me that she was up until 3 o'clock in the morning preparing. She said, "Is this the way laws are made in St. Paul?" She said, "I can't believe it. This is just a joke." And that was really disturbing to me. I'm still really not over what happened, and I'm concerned about it. You know, as a freshman, I'm working hard to listen to my constituency and to look for a way to respond. I prepared for this hearing. I spoke with both of the lobbyists on either side of the issue to get, heightened awareness about what the nature of this is. I read every email that came into my email box, and I know that my DFL colleagues received these same emails. We were all on these emails. And the opposition was 4-1 for this particular bill. So needless to say, I was extremely upset. I signaled the administrator several times during the committee, and I was acknowledged, but there was no time for me to speak up on behalf of my constituency. So, members, I would most definitely ask that this be brought back to civil law and that the will of the people be heard. Thank you.
Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I admit, Representative Lesch, that I did take an absorbent amount of time of asking questions. But in fairness, this topic filled my inbox and my email second most talked about topic. So when I asked those questions, those weren't my questions. Those were questions of my constituents. So, I took a lot of time, but those are the questions my constituents gave me to ask. So if we're going to do fairness to this bill and fairness to our constituents, I think we need to go back and have that opportunity to ask the questions our constituents asked us to ask. So in reference to that, I know I took a lot of time. I asked those questions that my constituents asked me to ask. There were other questions that other constituents in this great state wanted to ask. So if we didn't allow enough time to get that done, I say we're doing a disservice to our constituents. So I ask in respect, Representative Lesch, I do ask for this for a red vote. Thank you.
Representative Lesch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Howe. I was not being accusatory of you in terms of taking up too much time. As it happened, you did take an inordinate amount of time, but that was your right, and you were asking those questions from. I didn't mean to say that you took up too much time. But it was almost as much time as the proponents took in their testimony, specifically not about describing the bill, but in promoting the bill. I will say, members, please be mindful of the fact that 80% of the bills that go through this body could tangentially have some relation to civil law. And if we took every single one of those bills and talked about all the aspects of the bills and not just the civil law parts, we would be here 2 years from now working on the same bills. So we are forced at some point to say, please limit it to the civil law portions. And please talk about the ag environment portions in that respective committee. Now, I understand...
Members, Representative Lesch, just it's getting hard to hear for some of the members. If you are going to talk, if you could go to the alcoves or to the retiring room, that would be helpful. Representative Lesch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, I understand some of you on the Civil Law Committee don't sit on those other committees, so you don't get to ask those questions. Representative Pugh didn't get to ask her questions. And for that, I apologize. We will do better time management in the future, and I'm asking for your green vote to send it on so that we can have those multiple other stops where members of the public will have multiple other opportunities to talk about those provisions.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate Representative Lesch, Chair Lesch, and his words of apology. I just wanted to read an email that I received from someone from Baytown Township in regards to, she was listening to the committee hearing, or she was watching it on House TV. She says, the way the committee was handled was absolutely ridiculous. Watched online. There's serious issues that need to be addressed. The opposition never got a chance to speak. This should never happen. And so, folks, I would just ask for, again, for both sides of the aisle to put actions behind the words of transparency and letting the public be heard. That was the #1 complaint that I received, was the public was not heard. My questions, I'm fine without having those asked, but when the public is not heard, that's a whole other issue. So I would ask for a red vote, please. Thank you.
Further discussion. Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and point of parliamentary inquiry, please.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering if you could remind the body one more time the meaning of their green vote and their red vote.
Sure. So, members, we are on the motion, or not a motion, we're on the order of business of adopting the committee report on House File number 84. So a green vote would be to adopt the report and move it on as the committee passed it. A red vote would be to reject the report, in which case it would return to civil law. Any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 66 ayes and 61 nays, the report is adopted. Introduction of bills. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. The Chief Clerk will report the House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction and first reading of House Files 572 through 630.
First reading, House Files 572 through 630. Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is House File 251. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 251, number 1 on the calendar for today, an act relating to agriculture.
Representative Poppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I would encourage your support for House File 251. This bill extends the sunset date for the Farmer Lender Mediation Program. It's a 4-year extension. The Farmer Lender Mediation Act was enacted in 1986 when there was severe financial stress in the agriculture economy, and farmers across the state were in distress, and the lenders as well were in distress, trying to figure out how to actually assist the farmers. And the bill was enacted in order to allow the farmers and lenders to have a cooling off period, and in order to be able to mediate the dispute that they had, in order to resolve the problems, in order to pay the bills and set up payment plans. This act has been, the sunset has been extended over the period of years. This request is to extend that sunset by 4 years, and I would ask for your support.
Discussion to the bill. Seeing no discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill.
Oh, third reading.
Third reading.
Third reading, House File 251.
Now, seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Right, so we're good now, right?
No.
Oh, no, it's fine. The clerk will close the roll. There being 124 ayes and 5 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File number 66. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 66, number 3 on the calendar for today, an act relating to waters, the first engrossment.
Recognize the author, Representative Hansen, who will explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 66 is the product of the Drainage Work Group. The Drainage Work Group is established in statute to look at issues relating to drainage, and our drainage laws are very old, but the Drainage Work Group is a broad group of folks who spend meeting after meeting looking at the drainage law, and they have come to these consensus recommendations that were provided to us from the Board of Water and Soil Resources. The bill makes some technical changes relating to definitions and for reestablishment of drainage records. Sometimes drainage records can be lost, and there has to be a way of restoring them. Talks about the storage of that, and then also some of the new technology relating to drainage ditches. And Representative Torkelson has worked on this, and I believe also has some things to say. You should be receiving a letter that is signed by the members of the Drainage Work Group, and I would ask for your support for the bill.
That's what you.
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I did attend some of the meetings of the Drainage Work Group. It's a nicely balanced work group that has been working for a long time to revise these statutes and regulations. They've done some good work and deserve your green vote.
So there are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 66.
Third reading. Further discussion to the bill. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 128 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 58. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 58, number 2 on the calendar for today, an act relating to state government.
The author of Representative Swatsky, for what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Joining us today is a former constituent, Mallory Vogel, as well as her fiancé, Eduardo Moreno. They are visiting us from Chile, where Eduardo is a first lieutenant in the Chilean Navy. Please welcome them.
Now to the author of the bill, Representative Lillie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Senate File 58 is a bill that ratifies 5 labor contracts and 2 compensation plans with state employees in the executive branch. Under state law, the MMB negotiates on behalf of the state with the labor unions. Those contracts are then, once agreed upon, are sent to the Subcommittee on Employee Relations. And the Subcommittee on Employee Relations is made up of 5 members of the House and 5 members of the Senate. And in the Senate, it's Metzen, Eaton, Saxog, Benson, and Chamberlain. And in the House of Representatives, it's Hillstrom, Winkler, Representative Drazkowski, Pepin, and myself. The subcommittee met in January, and we ratified the 5 contracts. Keep in mind that in my start I said these are executive branch contracts, so they're not all in the corner office there with Governor Dayton. These are folks that are spread all across our great state. And then there's also 2 compensation plans that are also were passed that day in the Subcommittee on Employee Relations. The subcommittee then recommended approval of those bills, and then from there they came to the committee process, and so the bill then went to Labor, Workforce and Industry, State Government Affairs, and Ways and Means. And I want to thank members along the way that have offered good input and suggestions over the last couple of weeks to make this this bill, or to at least to discuss and talk about it. Essentially, our project here today is to ratify this. The major provisions set forth in this the contracts are a 2% across the board increase for employees starting in January, so backing up just to January and then going to June of this year. And this is the first across the board increase that the state employees have received since 2008, so 3.5 years. There's also step increases, provides step increases, which are performance-based increases for employees. And those step increases go to the employees that aren't at the top of their range. So just keep in mind that half of our state employees are not at the top of the range. So it's the ones that are newer employees and have perhaps just been hired, and then they'll be evaluated, and then they get the step. So that's in the contract. Also, on regards to insurance, there really are the state employees. It was negotiated between the MMB and the employee groups that they would contribute more towards their co-pays and deductibles, and these are paid for by the employees and their dependents. So just keep in mind, if we don't do these contracts, there's actually a $7.9 million savings or loss to the state, because there is a savings that we would get by ratifying these contracts. The fiscal impact by these contracts in the first, so it's actually for this biennium that we're in right now currently, and they've actually started to negotiate the new biennium, but as it sits right now, the fiscal impact will be 1.5% on this biennium at a total cost of $76 million. And on the next biennium, a 4.9% increase, and on the 14-15 biennium. And that's $249 million. So what happens is, just to be clear, the departments are expected to, these aren't tax increases, the departments and agencies are expected to absorb these costs and savings, or not savings, but this cost of the increase of these contracts, and then put them back, because their budget has already been set by the last legislature. Just to be clear, in the past, this bill has passed. It really shouldn't be too controversial, although in the last couple of years it has proved to be a little bit, but I'm hoping that we can move beyond that and start a new day. I'm getting smiles from over there, so I guess I'm a little naive. I'm not feeling the Valentine's love, perhaps. But in 2006, this bill passed 131-1. 2008, the contracts passed 128-1. In 2010, it passed 118-1. So it really shouldn't be a partisan kind of issue. These contracts have been negotiated in good faith between the MMB and our work groups, and I really feel that the legislature should respect that process. These contracts and plans provide for reasonable increases to our valuable state workers, and they are getting a 2% cost of living increase effective this month. And I really feel these are long overdue. They've waited, quite a while here for these contracts to come into place. They should have been really passed and put into law last summer, but here we are today. And I just kind of, I see we have some amendments. I guess I would challenge members to try to remember that when we're talking about these contracts today, we're talking about people. We're talking about our neighbors, our constituents, people in our capital that are cleaning for us and helping us. Our staff up in front here aren't covered by this, but the other night they were here with us for 10 hours, and I've heard a lot of retirement speeches where we all say how great they are, and they are. But I I think we really need to show respect to the bargaining process that exists, and certainly respect to our state employees. So I'll stand for the amendments, or however that goes.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Benson M. moving to amend Senate File 58, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded 58A6.
Representative Benson.
Mr. Speaker, I'm temporarily withdrawing the amendment.
The amendment has been withdrawn. Representative Benson withdraws his amendment. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report that amendment.
Quam moving to amend Senate File 58, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded 58A2.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I like things, straightforward, and so my amendment.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Representative Winkler.
Mr. Speaker, point of order under State Statute 179A.22 and State Statute 3.855. The law says that the agreements must be submitted to the legislature to be accepted or rejected in accordance with this section. And Section 3.855. Section 3.855 says the same thing. It says that the Legislative Coordinating Commission shall submit the matter to the legislature to be accepted or rejected under this section. And we are ratifying contracts. Mr. Speaker, I would also point out that Mason's Section 443 is consistent with the state statute, which says that if you are ratifying an action of a committee, you are able to accept or reject it, not to amend it. So, Mr. Speaker, under state statute and consistent with Mason's, I believe that the motion to amend and all motions to amend this bill are out of order.
Advice. So there's a point of order been raised. Yes, Representative Anderson. What purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, if you could clarify, what was the reference in Mason's? I missed that. If you could please give that again.
The reference in Mason's was Section 443.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, it has been a long tradition that when this bill comes to the House floor, it's been amended before. So our custom and usage has been to actually amend this bill. So regardless of what you see in those statutes or whatever, we have had a tradition of amending the state contract bill here on the House floor, and that goes with custom and usage.
Representative Winkler?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice. Custom and usage is actually very limited in this manner. I think these contracts may have been amended once in history. So that's not very much custom, it's not very much usage, and it's certainly inconsistent with state law, which we've passed and is validly signed by the governor. And it says that it is to be accepted or rejected, and that is consistent with parliamentary practice in Mason's. So, Mr. Speaker, the point of order is raised based on state statute, and it is not raised on Mason's.
Representative Pepin. For what purpose do you rise?
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Thank you. I echo Representative Anderson's comments. Every year since I've been here that we've taken up these negotiations, I believe we've at least discussed and voted on amendments. Whether or not we've adopted any or one or however many Representative Winkler points out, I think is immaterial. Representative Winkler also rose under Section 443, motions to ratify, and Section 3 of that says the motion to ratify is debatable and opens the entire question to debate. So for those reasons, I ask you to find the motion out of order.
Representative Driscowski, for what purpose do you rise?
I rise to provide advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Winkler, past legislatures don't have the ability to bind future legislatures. I haven't checked out the statutes, Representative Winkler, that you brought forward, and be interested in actually looking at those. But we are not bound by past legislatures that write particular parts of law. This is an ability for us to write into these contracts, these proposals, what the will of the legislature is going forward.
Representative Winkler, for what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, the final piece of advice.
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Drazkowski, we are bound by law, and obviously as a legislature we could change the law by passing it and having it signed, but we can bind ourselves by passing laws to which we are subject. So under 179A and under 3.855, we have already set this pattern for ourselves, which is that our job is to accept or reject the contracts, not to amend it. And Representative Peppin, they certainly are debatable, but debate does not mean a motion. And if you look through the rest of that Mason section, it says that the motion to ratify can be switched for a motion to reject, which is essentially the same thing. It's a yes or no vote. And I fully grant your right to debate and to vote no, but to amend it is not in order.
Advice, Mr. Speaker?
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, if you actually look at the history of this bill as it traveled through the committee process, it was on the Senate side, it was actually amended and referred to the Finance Committee. So if that's the case, we would probably have to send this bill entirely back to the committee process because it was amended in the Senate. So if you're saying that it can't be amended at all, that means it can't be amended in committee either.
Representative Anderson, could you let me know, was the amendment to add additional contracts to be ratified?
Mr. Speaker, I haven't gotten that far in my research, but thank you.
Representative Doubt, what purpose do you rise?
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
I'll agree. This is a bill before this body. We're pointing to a section in Mason's on a motion to ratify. I don't agree that this is a motion to ratify. This is a bill before this body. If we're going to cite statute, this body, that's the authority of this body is to create new statutes. And we deal with bills here every day. The precedence of order of importance of what we take into account in our rules, custom and usage is a higher precedence than Mason's. And the custom and usage of this body has been to amend this bill numerous times in the past. So for you to rule in favor of this would be a departure from our precedents or our custom and usage of the past of this body, and particularly on this bill. Moreover, amendments were offered in this body in committee on this particular bill. So this motion certainly wasn't offered then, and it's not appropriate now. So I would ask that you rule against the motion.
Representative Quam, for what purpose do you rise?
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, even though at times I've heard one chamber or the other referred to as, the lesser body, I believe we have equal power, we have equal authority from the people, and I do not wish that this chamber have less authority, power, and discretion than the other chamber. And because of that, I would advise that you allow us the same power, discretion, and authority that the other chamber has exercised upon this bill. That's my advice, Mr. Speaker.
Members, having listened to the advice of Representative Winkler and Anderson and Doubt and Quam, and I know I'm missing somebody, I apologize, and Representative Pepin, having reviewed the statutes and the amendment and the citation to Masons, I find that the point of order is well taken.
Mr. Speaker,
Representative Doubt.
I'd like to appeal the ruling of the chair, and I'd ask for a roll call vote.
Roll call has been requested. There are 15 hands. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no or red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. Representative Doubt.
Point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
What is the motion? What is this before the body? Is it a bill? Is it a motion? What is it?
Representative Doubt, it is a bill. Well, the current thing, what was ruled on was an amendment to a bill.
Sure. But the main motion before the body is a bill?
That is correct, Representative Doubt.
I rise for advice, Mr. Speaker.
Advice to the body. Representative Doubt.
Correct. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is uncharted territory, okay? This is you giving away your rights, and it's outrageous. You're going to say that you can't amend a bill in this body? That a member of this body can't represent his constituents or her constituents by amending a bill before this body? Outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. You're going to give away your constitutional right to represent your constituents? We absolutely cannot do that. And it's your obligation to exercise your right to represent your constituents. Outrageous.
Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice to the body.
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, members, the reason why this is not outrageous is because a motion to amend the contract is a motion to reject the contract. It is the same thing. If the motion prevails and the contract is amended, it is the same as rejecting it under the statute. You send the negotiators back to square one in order to start again. That is why this is not outrageous. We have created a law that sets forth a process for negotiating state contracts. The contracts come back to the legislature to be accepted or rejected. We have full right to reject it, and either we can amend it, and that will be the form of a rejection, or we can just vote to reject it. Again, I have no problem with debating the merits. I have no problem with a no vote. That's certainly your constitutional right. But the reason why this is not outrageous from a parliamentary perspective is because amending it is the same as rejecting it. You're just taking the main question from a different direction. And finally, the proper way to deal with this is, if you don't like the system, it's to change the statute. We have created the statute for ourselves. We live under it. If we want to change it, we can do so, and the legislature itself can negotiate the contracts. But the whole idea behind PELRA is that the legislature isn't going in to negotiate these contracts. We assign it to professionals, and it comes back to us on an up or down vote. An analogy to this, members, would be like a base closing commission. It comes back to Congress on an up or down vote. That's what these contracts are. Another analogy, members, would be ratification of members of the cabinet. We don't substitute a different member if we don't like the one that the governor has appointed. It is not outrageous to just take this as a yes or no vote without amendment. We have ample opportunity to affect how state employees are treated through the ordinary committee and legislative process. So my advice is, members, that you should vote to uphold the ruling of the Speaker and move forward with a yes or no vote and a debate on the merits of the contracts as negotiated, rather than having us get into the process, which is contrary to law.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. If that was the case, and we were to follow the guidelines that Representative Winkler has laid out here today, this bill would not be able to be amended in committee either. And it actually was amended in committee, Representative Winkler. So we've already gone past that. Not only that, we have had a history in this state on every time this bill has come up to the floor that this bill has been amended or attempted to be amended. So we're going to say that all of that history is gone and out the window because of what he's saying here today. That means that any time in the future This is going to set the precedence for this, folks. So down the road, if you want to make an amendment to this bill, that's gone. So I recommend that you vote to not uphold the Speaker's ruling.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of information.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What my information that I'm curious about is this is indicated as a Senate file, the first engrossment. Does this mean that the Senate amended this file?
Representative Quam, the Senate did add provisions to this, additional contracts to this bill.
Mr. Speaker, I then would wish to give advice to the chamber.
State your advice.
Representatives, again, this chamber and all of us in it have the same rights authority that the other chamber has. If we do not overturn this ruling, we are saying that we are lesser in authority, power, than the other body. I ask you to reaffirm that we are on the same level as the other chamber with the authority and power granted to us in our election. Thank you.
Representative Lillie.
Mr. Speaker, advice?
Members can just state their advice to the body.
I ask that you support the ruling of the chair, and some of this has been discussed here already, but there's some, I don't know how to say it nicely, but there's some misinformation kind of going forward. It was amended, but it was a merging of the two, the existing contracts that we passed, the 5 last session, and then the ones, and then the other ones catching up this session that had been passed. So it wasn't like it was a substantive change, or we changed steps and lanes, or whatever Representative Benson cares about, or 2%, or performance, things. It wasn't that. It was merging the contracts were put together. And to be clear, it's the bill's never been amended on the House floor that I've been able to find. There is one time that it was brought to my attention that the bill has been amended during the Ventura years. The governor at that time added in domestic partners benefits, and it was understood that it would not pass the bodies at that time. So they did peel it off, and it came forward and then became law. So that is the one time that to clarify that it has been amended. So I'm not usually doing this advice thing, so it's kind of fun.
Representative Poppe.
Mr. Speaker, advice to the body.
State your advice.
Members, Representative Winkler stood and said that we needed to essentially not amend this bill because on state statute it would be a violation of state statute. And then he cited Mason's manual and talking about how, quoting something about motions and amendments. I would submit to you under 645, statute 645.26, subdivision 4, laws passed at different sessions when the provisions of 2 or more laws passed at different sessions of the legislature are irreconcilable, the law latest and date of final enactment shall prevail. And think about it, members. How ridiculous. If the new standard is that it violates state statute, what are you doing every time you introduce a bill? You're trying to change state statute. So if that's the standard, this is ridiculous. And members, I want you to really think about what we're doing today. I was on I talked about this before, and I'm going to remind you all. I was on the subcommittee, and I was on my first question on that subcommittee, and I wanted to get some background on this, and I was told by the chair that our job was to rubber stamp it. So I never got to really ask the questions I wanted to. And then this did not get sent to government operations, where under custom and usage, it has gone every year since at least the last 20 years or so. I'm on government operations. I would have liked to hear that bill and had the opportunity to ask questions. But again, this body decided not to do that. Members, we talked a long time on Monday about transparency and accountability. And I understand that there is some language in statute about the agreements that makes it difficult for us to make changes. But if we're going to get the point in the legislature where we can't even discuss amendments on the House floor, that is a really sad day in Minnesota, as former Representative Intenza would say. Members, I would really ask you to think long and hard before you vote on this. You don't have to vote with your leadership on this. This is simply a discussion about whether or not we can listen to amendments and we can vote on amendments. This is a ridiculous conversation. Members, I ask that you vote red.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, new legislation coming forward does override past legislation, and I talked to some of our staff about it. It seems very clear. Additionally, I'd like to point out that as you look at the bill, in addition to the 5 labor union agreements, there's 2 labor group agreements that are not union contracts. Both the commissioner's plan and the managerial plans are not labor agreements. They are groups of employees that are being put forward by the administration for approval through the subcommittee on employer relations and then to the legislature. Members, this is inherently amendable. I urge you to vote red on the motion.
Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Poppe and members, you certainly can change the statute, but the language in this bill doesn't change the statute, and the language in your amendments doesn't change the statute. That doesn't change that provision of 179A, and it doesn't change the provision of 3.855. So yes, we certainly can change state law. That's kind of our business. But we can't do it unless we actually change state law. We can't just sort of take action and ignore statutes that bind us. And Mr. Speaker and members, Representative Drazkowski raised these non-labor agreements, but they're still covered under 3.855, where the Subcommittee on Employee Relations sent them to the legislature or to the House as a whole to be ratified or to be approved or rejected. So both types of contracts are here. And the only amendments that have been made to this bill have been to add or remove contracts, not to interfere in the contracts themselves. Because if we interfere with them, we are rejecting them. So just take a no vote. Debate it. That's fine. I totally understand the importance of doing that. But it's not the same thing as our interference with those contracts.
Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice to the body.
State your advice.
Thank you. I think one of the benefits of having a citizen legislature is that oftentimes we get the opportunity to hear different points of view or different perspectives. And this is a perspective that I can bring to this body because I've spent the last 10 or 12 years negotiating contracts across this state between public employees and public employers. So when Representative Winkler talks about the PELRA statute, it's something that I understand very clearly and very well. Within that statute, there's a term that's called good faith bargaining, but there's a more important term that's called terms and conditions of employment. And these are the pieces that are negotiated between the employee groups and the employer. And these amendments that I'm seeing on my desk, they attempt to change terms and conditions of employment. And the fact of the matter is that in the PELRA statute, we do not have that authority. We do not have that authority. The amendment that's been talked about that the Senate did is in order. It did not change the terms and conditions of employment. You could offer an amendment to this bill, I believe, that does not change the terms and conditions of employment. We cannot violate state statute, and I encourage you to think long and hard about that vote. Thank you.
Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and advice to the body. I think what we're getting a little into the weeds here. What we're talking about is a bill that's before the body and whether or not we have the ability to amend it. And I guess I reject the notion that amending a bill is rejecting a bill. And I think it's very dangerous territory, as a few folks here have talked about, for us to go down that route of saying that amending a bill is rejecting a bill and we don't have the ability to amend a bill that's before the body. And I think that's pretty dangerous precedent. In reading the statute, I understand that Representative Winkler believes that it says you can't amend. I don't see where it says you can't amend. It doesn't say you can amend. But I would suggest that the body has the authority, when a bill is before it, to amend it, and would certainly think that would be a precedent we would follow. And while we may have only done the domestic partners floor amendment in the past, I think that certainly is a precedent. But I also believe that we've entertained amendments in the past and would certainly be open to hearing from members who have entertained amendments, even if they weren't passed, that we've discussed those amendments, that we've either voted them up or down, and the ability for us to do that here on the House floor is exactly what we're talking about, is that we have the ability to represent our constituents through the amendment process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Purcell.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
I appreciate that Representative Winkler has made us aware of 3.855 employee relations and the language therein. And I would just advise, I wish I'd written down over the last 10 days or so how many times I heard the two words law abiding. Law abiding. This is law. We need to abide by the law. As Representative Winkler said, if we want to change the law, let's change the law. But let's be law abiding. We've heard that so many times around the Capitol, around committees. Law abiding. You all don't want to break the law. You don't want to do that. But that's what you'll do if you want to go forward with your amendments. So let's just be law abiding legislators of Minnesota and vote this thing the way we need to vote it.
All right. Seeing no further discussion on the appeal of the ruling of the Speaker, the question again before the body: shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or a green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no or a red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 58 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the decision of the Speaker shall stand. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Sanders moving to amend Senate File 58, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded RA 1317.
Representative Sanders, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this amendment actually restores the 2% of the payroll to all Minnesotans, ensuring in the form of the payroll tax that was taken by the federal government. What this does is has the effect of restoring that 2% to all Minnesotans, including our state employees, at that point in time. So, members, I ask for your support on this amendment, and I ask for a roll call, Mr. Speaker.
A roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion. Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise under Rule 3.21. Motions and propositions must be germane, and I have advice.
State your advice, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The bill before us, Representative Lillie's bill, is a straight-up contract. There's no statutory reference in the foundational bill. And Representative Sanders' amendment is dealing with the tax credit. There is no tax credit reference, no statutory reference dealing with the tax credit in the body of the legislation, and therefore I suggest it's not germane and would ask for the body's support.
Representative Sanders, for what purpose do you rise?
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. True, there may not be tax credits right now listed in there, but what this amendment does is provide them a tax credit. All Minnesotans, including all of our state employees that lost 2% of their payroll tax when the federal government took that from all Minnesotans earning an income check, this restores that. This is absolutely appropriate on this bill, and I ask that you find this germane, Mr. Speaker.
Having listened to the advice of Representative Murphy and Representative Sanders and reviewing the bill and the amendment, I find that the point of order is well taken.
Mr. Speaker?
Representative Sanders.
I'd like to appeal the ruling of the Speaker and ask for a roll call.
Representative Sanders asked to appeal the ruling of the Speaker. There are 15 hands, so there will be a roll call. Seeing no discussion, the question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no or red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 59 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the decision of the Speaker shall stand. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Erickson moving to amend Senate File 58, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A14.
To your amendment, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The 58A14 amendment is an addition at the end of this Senate file that would request our agencies to give us a report by March 15th of this year as to what they've had to take out of their budgets to accommodate this increase. Because remember, in the agreement, the agencies said that they would eat the increased costs. So I think it behooves us to know what services now will not be offered if indeed this contract or these contracts are ratified. There are several $1 million that have to come out of agency budgets to accommodate this increase, at least $78 million, I believe, in the first part of, or the last year, and then going into this biennium, another additional several million. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would ask for a green vote.
Representative Murphy.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise again under Rule 3.21, motions and propositions not germane. And I have advice.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Again, the bill before us is a straight-up contract language. There are no statutory references. There's no reference to a report. And we would have no idea what the cost of such a report would be. And so, therefore, I believe that this amendment is not germane and would ask for your support in that ruling.
Representative Erickson.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Thank you. My advice would be that this is a new section that follows, and that it is very important for us to know what services are the agencies going to continue offering if these contracts are ratified. This is a common sense approach. It is transparency. It is accountability, and we should know from the agencies what they've had to do since they took it upon themselves to more or less pay for the increases. I think just common sense tells us, Mr. Speaker. I do not point to a certain section in Masons, but I might find one.
Having listened to the advice of Representative Murphy and Representative Erickson, I find that the point of order is not well taken. Further discussion? Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I've got a point of order.
State your point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would move that this amendment is out of order under Rule 4.05. And have advice.
State your advice.
Just reading the rule, Mr. Speaker, and looking at the amendment, I think it complies with, it's clearly out of order based on the language of the amendment.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and this is my advice that Section 416, alternative propositions, would be appropriate for this amendment to go forth as an attachment to Senate File 58. That is Section 416 of Masons. We're more or less filling in some blanks. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I would also like a roll call on this vote.
We're on a point of order, and so if you want to request the roll call when we're done with the point of order on your amendment, we can get to that. Representative Doubt.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rule 4.05 does not apply here. This amendment does not increase any spending or spending base or appropriations. So this rule simply does not apply to this amendment.
Representative Murphy.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. In fact, I think Rule 4.05 is applicable here. This is asking that we expend revenue in order to do a report. We have no idea what that report would cost. We have no fiscal note about that, but we know to do that work, for the state agencies to do that work, would require some spending, and that is the heart of Rule 4.05, and therefore it applies.
Representative Woodard, for what purpose do you rise?
Advice to the body, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this certainly is in order. What we have here is a request that something the agencies are going to have to do anyway. The agencies are going to have to figure out where this money is coming from. So this is money that's going to be spent already. And we're asking for some transparency so that all Minnesotans know what is going to have to happen, what services are going to have to be reduced, changed, reallocated, whatever it might be, in order to fund these increases. So it is simply just asking for some transparency for reports that already are going to have to be written by the agencies and plans that are going to have to be done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative
Murphy.
Mr. Speaker and members, I will withdraw at this point my objection under Rule 4.05.
Okay, Representative Murphy withdraws her point of order. Representative Erickson has requested a roll call. Are there 15 hands? Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion to the amendment. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 58 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Drazkowski moving to amend Senate File 58, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A12.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a roll call.
Roll call has been requested. There's 15 hands. There will be a roll call. Representative Drazkowski.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask to modify the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
I'd like to modify the amendment, Mr. Speaker.
State your modification.
Mr. Speaker, on line 1.4, prior to the first word on 1.4, I'd like to insert notwithstanding Chapter 179A and Section 3.855.
The clerk will report the modification.
I think on line 1.4, after, notwithstanding, or before it?
Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, do you want to restate your modification?
I will, Mr. Speaker. I'm just curious. I think we're on A12. Yes, it would be on
A12?
On line 1.4, inserting at the very beginning of line 1.4 the words notwithstanding Chapter 179A and Section 3.855.
Okay, which one? Evidently on the top there's an A12. Top one was an A12 and all the ones underneath are 11. That should be going here. A12? Yeah, one A12. Okay, so then... That's the wrong one. I don't have it. I got handed A11. What's that top number? I got handed Which one are we going to take? We're going to take A11 and A12.
So members, we're on the A12 amendment. The clerk will... Can you restate your modification one more time, Representative Drazkowski?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. On line 1.4, at the very beginning of the line, insert notwithstanding Chapter 179A and Section 3.855.
Got it.
The clerk will restate the modification for the body.
Yeah, on line 1.4 of the A12 amendment, before if in line 1.4, add the language notwithstanding Chapter 179A, comma, Section 3.855. Can that be right?
Representative Drazkowski, to your modified amendment.
I'm sorry, it's and Section 3.855.
Representative Drazkowski.
That's correct. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Mr. Speaker, this particular amendment will...
Representative Winkler, for what purpose do you rise?
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, under Rule 3.21, motions and propositions must be germane. By modifying the amendment to include two sections of statute that are not currently in the bill, Representative Drazkowski is adding an amendment that is not germane. The contracts stand in this bill on their own, rejected or accepted. By adding a section of statute, he is adding a non-germane. He is seeking to add an amendment that is not germane, and I would ask you to rule it out of order.
Representative Drazkowski, for what purpose do you rise?
Advice, Mr.
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, members, advice. The insertion of the language about Chapter 179A, the notwithstanding, and Section 3.855, notwithstanding it. It is very common in the custom and usage of this body to use that in amendments long into our history and not make the judgment on those as you would around content. These are not content specific. These are basically saying notwithstanding or in spite of those chapters, we would like to do this. So members and Mr. Speaker, I would offer the advice that the point of order is not well taken.
Having listened to the... Representative Quam, advice?
Yes, Mr. Speaker,
State your advice.
My advice is that the germaneness was established when the same representative that objects to it utilizes these sections as being germane to the bill and the work before us. And my advice is that if it's germane to affect amendments, it's germane to amend.
Having listened to the advice of Representative Winkler and Drazkowski and Quam, I find that the point of order is well taken. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Drazkowski moving to amend Senate File 58, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A11.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would ask to modify this amendment.
State your modification.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to replace on line 1.4, replace the term Section 1 with the following: Chapter 179A and Section 3.855.
The clerk will report the modification.
Drazkowski is modifying his amendment as follows. On line 1.4, delete Section 1 and insert Chapter 179A and Section 3.855.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, what this amendment does...
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Winkler, for what purpose do you rise?
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
Under Rule 3.21, motions and propositions must be germane by adding statutory sections 179A and 3.855 to the amendment. The amendment is no longer germane to the bill if the underlying amendment was germane in the first place. I'd ask you to rule the amendment out of order.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for advice.
State your advice.
The advice is the same as the last amendment, Mr. Speaker, and that is that indeed our custom and usage runs very deep in this body, and we have done this over and over again with hundreds of amendments in the time that I've been here without a germaneness issue being called on the reference to the chapters being referenced in the notwithstanding section or phrase.
Representative Pepin, for what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, advice.
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, we've been here, we've gone through several amendments, and this is getting highly frustrating. I don't see how anyone can say that this isn't directly germane to the bill at hand. We're talking about pay for performance in relation to the salary increase that we're discussing. And as Representative Drazkowski has said, we have frequently, over the years that I've been here, ruled on germaneness when language such as notwithstanding has been included in it. There's nothing that prevents us from doing that today. And members, this is really frustrating. This is just another attempt by the majority to shut the minority down. It is our job to ask tough questions, to bring forward tough amendments, to debate them. And when you continue to shut the minority down like this, it sends a really bad message. We talked about this on Monday. We talked about transparency and accountability. Come on, members. Mr. Speaker, this is ridiculous. This isn't what the people sent us to do. We need to come here. If you don't like the amendment, vote against it. But don't make some sham argument that it's not germane when clearly it is. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Doubt, for what purpose do you
Advice,
rise?
Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, what we're doing here is giving up the rights of this body by continuing to say that we're not able to amend this. And I'll agree with Representative Pepin that we had a spirited debate about the rules of this body, and everybody in this body talked about the need for more transparency. And what I'm seeing here today is not transparency. What I'm seeing here today is continually using the rules and procedural motions to stop people from actually hearing us debate in this body. And we're trampling on the custom and usage that runs very deep in this body. And Mr. Speaker, you and I have had a lot of conversations about maintaining the integrity of this body and the rights of this body. And this, certainly, the actions that I'm seeing on the floor today fly in the face of that. When this bill came up on the Senate floor, there was a point of order that was raised, and the President of the Senate actually ruled the point of order not well taken, and cited Section 43A.18 and allowed amendments in the Senate on the contracts. Now we've got members of our body wanting to have it both ways, saying that because of this statute, we're not allowed to make amendments. And even by mentioning this statute, now all of a sudden it's not germane if you mention this statute. I have not seen a departure from the decorum like this in my 2 years in this body. This is outrageous, members. And Mr. Speaker, I would ask you to step in here and be the voice of reason and offer a sense of understanding that this body does have an ability to take this stuff up, that we do have an ability to make sure that our voice and the voices of our constituents are heard in this body, and make sure that we operate this body under the transparency that we all talked about on Monday night when we debated the rules in this body. This is not transparency. I spoke at a college class this morning, Mr. Speaker, and I talked about how this body operates and how I see politics becoming more and more divisive. And there are things that we can do to make sure that that doesn't happen. And I talked about how a few years ago, and I mentioned the same thing in the Rules Committee, that I visited Washington, D.C. 10 years ago, and I remember being shocked when I walked into that body, because I thought what I saw on TV, that when members stood at that microphone and made a speech on the House floor or the Senate floor in D.C., that body was full, and that members were sitting there listening to the debate, and actually decisions were being made, and this was government. But when I got there, it was much different. The members go to the floor and they speak on a schedule, and when you look at the body, it's empty. There's nobody in the seats. Nobody's paying any attention. People get frustrated with the way this government works because there's no transparency. What you're doing here by continually, motion after motion, on procedural motions that you don't want to have debate in this body, it's outrageous. You think the minority doesn't have a right to have their voice heard in this body? You said the other night that we did. Now, procedural motion after procedural motion to silence the minority. That flies in the face of the tradition of this body, Mr. Speaker, and I ask you to rule against this. It's outrageous.
So, members, having listened to the advice of several members and reviewed the amendment, I find that the point of order is not well taken. Discussion to the amendment. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, this amendment will exchange the 2% COLA increase for pay for performance. And members, when we had the Subcommittee on Employee Relations meeting over the last couple of years, we were reviewing this contract. Actually, this contract has a long history. If we look back in the historical record around the ratification of contracts, we find that the average duration is somewhere over the last 20 years, somewhere between 1 and 4 months at the 1 and 7 months is the most, but most of them are between 1 and 4 months is a normal duration during which the contract ratification process happens, all the way from the beginning initiation of negotiation of the contract to final ratification by the legislature. Now, this particular contract discussion began, or was supposed to begin, 2 years ago, in early 2011. Usually around March is the normal time that these negotiations begin on these contracts. Well, the current administration and the respective exclusive bargaining units didn't get, they postponed, or they really drug their feet on the beginning of the negotiation process in 2011. Then we had the government shutdown in July. And then we finally had the ability for our first subcommittee on employee relations in 2011 to meet in September of that year. That was the very first meeting where we actually had some substance in the negotiation process with which to talk about and evaluate. Now, at that point, and shortly after that point, we came to there came to an agreement with the AFSCME and the MAPE contracts, the two major contracts actually that really drive the entire negotiation process for all of the contracts, are those two contracts. But that process really kicked in then, and finally had, I think when we got to January of 2012, finally had an agreement that came forward, went back to the unions, and they rejected those agreements. Included in the agreement at the bargaining table to send it back to the unions was an agreement that if the unions rejected the contracts, that they would go to arbitration. They were on their way to arbitration, very close, within days of going to arbitration, and the governor came in and said, wait, let's renegotiate. Essentially, the governor got the people's wallet out, sweetened the pot, and went back, and they went to the negotiating table again and reached another agreement, a better agreement for the unions. The contracts were overwhelmingly approved at that point, the biennial contracts. We met with the subcommittee on employee relations in August then of 2012, and we had been asking members all throughout the process, we had been asking for reforms. We had asked the executive branch for reforms, pay for performance reforms, instead of just rubber stamping their increases with the current step process and the cost of the cost of living approach. The other thing that we had included was that the employees actually capture some of the responsibility for their health care premium. As we know, in state government, all of the 35,000 or more state employees covered by these contracts, every one of them, the full premium of their individual health care premium, the full cost, is paid by the taxpayers of the state of Minnesota. So we asked for that reform in the process. And those were the two major things that we had been asking for nearly a year and a half. One of them, which is embodied in this amendment. By the way, at that point, we did reject interim approval of those two contracts in August of 2012. And then we come to where we are today. The same contracts, same two contracts in their original form are coming forward, along with the other 5 agreements that we're seeing here before us in the bill today. But members, this amendment enacts some of that reform that we see so well in the private sector, but never takes its foothold in government. It's paying people for the performance that they bring forward, paying good performers well and not paying poor performers well. That's what this does. This amendment will enact a fundamental reform in the process that will bring performance up from what it is now, and will bring a piece of these public sector contracts in alignment with what we see in the private sector. Members, I encourage your support of the amendment.
Members, seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion say aye. All those opposed, no. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Kahn, for what purpose do you rise?
Speaker, I rise for a point of information to the body.
State your point of information.
Okay, I know that the body has a lot of new members, and I know specifically the Speaker is only in his second term, and so I think we have to have a certain amount of allowance. I'm sorry, the minority leader. But so we do have to have a certain amount of lack of judgment and lack of criticism. But I would refer members to Section 111 of Masons, which is a reference to the executive to other house or questions before the court. And it is unparliamentary and quoting Masons now, it is unparliamentary and inconsistent with the independence of a legislative body to refer to the name or office of the executive in order to influence the vote. It is irregular and unparliamentary for a member in one house of a legislature to quote or refer to the vote by which a measure passed the other house. So, again, we do not refer to the executive, the courts, or the other house in our deliberation on a matter. And I would urge people in future debates to pay attention to that part of Masons.
Thank you, Representative Kahn. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Scott moves that Senate File 58 moves to amend Senate File 58, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A4.
Representative Scott, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to insert some language on 1.4 of the amendment.
State your modification.
Modification would be the language notwithstanding Section 1, comma, Minnesota Statute Section 3.855 and 43A.18 and any other law to the contrary.
And any other?
The clerk will report the modification.
Scott is modifying her amendment on line 1.4 after Section 1, comma, and Section 3.8 Minnesota Statute Section 3.855, comma, 43A.18 and any law to the contrary.
Representative Scott.
Thank you. That's the correct language. And members, this bill basically asks all state employees, including all of us in this room, to pay 10% of our own health care premiums. As was pointed out before by Representative Drazkowski, currently we don't pay any portion of our own individual health care. We pay a portion, I believe it's somewhere around 10 or 15% of our family insurance. And so I think asking all the state employees to pay 10% towards their own health care premium is not asking too much. Prior to being elected to this office, my husband and I were self-employed. Our premium for a family of four was $1,000 a month for a $6,500 deductible. And that was 5 years ago.
I think that's right.
So since that time, I'm sure those premiums have gone up. So the private sector is paying anywhere between $1,000 and maybe $1,500 a month out of their own pockets for their family's health care. And we, I think, here on this body pay about $130 a month to pay for our coverage and our family's coverage. So, members, I would ask for a green vote. The public has a perception that the rules that apply to them don't apply to us, and this would change that. So I ask for your support on this amendment.
Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd request a roll call vote.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, 10% premium was actually the governor's starting negotiating point in his negotiation with the unions. And so I think this represents a number that makes very much sense. Unfortunately, though, the agreement didn't come back with that, and we can all speculate. Nobody was, I don't know of anybody who was in the room, but the agreement that did come back had zero in it. In other words, employees still, and that includes all of us here, pay 0% premium on our health insurance, on our individual health insurance. This represents about $50 a month. So $50 a month, and as Representative Scott pointed out, in the private sector, it's hundreds of dollars, sometimes thousands of dollars a month, and this would just be a start to actually bringing the public sector contracts to a point where...
Representative Winkler, for what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise under a point of order under state statute, as we've discussed before, 179A and 3.855, as well as the Mason's provision that I cited previously as well. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it says we have to vote up or down, not interfere with contracts.
Representative Drazkowski, for what purpose do you rise?
For advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Scott did modify our amendment to include, notwithstanding the proper sections in statute, and so I think the point is not well taken.
Having heard the advice of Representative Winkler and Drazkowski, having previously reviewed those statutes and the Mason's provision and this amendment, I find that the point of order is well taken. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Drazkowski moving to amend Senate File 58, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A15.
Representative Drazkowski, to your amendment.
Mr. Speaker, members, this amendment will basically says that union dues cannot be used for political purposes. As I talk to people...
Representative Murphy, for what purpose do you rise?
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Motions and propositions must be germane, Rule 3.21, and I have advice.
State your advice.
This amendment is a change in permanent law. The fundamental bill underneath, there's no permanent law, no change in statute, no reference to Chapter 211B, as is the amendment, and therefore I'd ask that you rule it out of order.
Representative Dowd, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice, I'm sorry.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My advice is this most certainly is germane. You've got language changing, adding language to the contract. That's what we're doing here, is approving the contracts. This adds additional language to that, and therefore it most certainly is germane. I'd ask that you rule that the point of order is not well taken.
Having listened to the advice of Representative Dowd and Murphy, having reviewed the amendment and the bill, I find that the point of order is well taken. There is another amendment at the desk.
Mr. Speaker,
Representative Dowd.
I'd like to appeal the ruling of the chair, and I'd ask for a roll call vote.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Members, the question before the body is, shall the ruling of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no or red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. Representative Pepin.
Mr. Speaker, advice to the body.
State your advice.
I'm just going to plea with you members one more time that this is really important stuff we're doing. Use of union dues for political purposes is absolutely germane to this when you read the context of the amendment. Now you can try to hide all you want, but we need to vote on amendments that are germane, and this is certainly germane. Members, I would ask that you not hide behind any sham motions and vote for this. I think that it's pretty clear if you read it that it is germane, and I ask that you vote red on this. Thank you. And has a roll call has been requested?
Roll call has been requested. Representative Yaruso.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I read this amendment, since it begins, no labor organization, this is a very, very sweeping amendment that, if it were passed, seems to me would apply well beyond this contract, and so it would certainly be outside of the scope of the contract negotiations. Thank you.
Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice to the body.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This obviously, members, this is what we've been doing all day here. And by saying that you think this isn't germane, you're saying that you don't have the ability and that you're not a party at the table to have any say in these contracts. This is basically adding language to a contract. And you are a party in the negotiations, and this is how you make sure your voice is heard, right here on the House floor. So, your constituents have an interest in this, you have an interest in this, and we are stewards of tax dollars that go to pay these contracts. So we need to make sure that we're exercising our right and our constitutional right to preserve the fact that we are a party at the table in these negotiations, and you can do that right here and right now. By saying that this is not germane, it says that you don't have the ability to add anything or have any voice in these contracts. It isn't about the content of this amendment. It's about, can you add language to a contract? And that's what you're choosing, whether you can or cannot do. It isn't about what this amendment says. You overrule the Speaker on this point of order, and then you'll get to have your voice in whether you like the language or not. But right now, you've got to preserve your right to have a say in these contracts, and that's what you're doing. So do not give up your constitutional right in this process. And this is very dangerous territory that we're wading into. And I know I've stood up and numerous times used words like outrageous. I think it is. Think about what you're doing. You don't have a right to have any input in this stuff? You only get to be a rubber stamp? Is that what you want? Do you want to go back into your districts and say, all I am is a rubber stamp? I just get to vote yes or no. I don't get to have any further say. That's what you're doing. Please vote red.
Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice. Members, this is a contract. These are contracts that have been negotiated in good faith by the executive branch within the parameters of appropriations that we have created and within a process that we have created and put into law. It is not our role to go back after those contracts have been negotiated and to start changing the provisions unilaterally on our own without respecting the contract negotiation process. We don't do that in any other context. This would be the equivalent of telling the governor that he can't have one cabinet officer, but we're going to tell them that he can have another. We have created a system in law that gives the executive branch the power to negotiate, not us. If we begin to try to amend the provisions of the contract on the floor, we are entirely eliminating the provisions of 179A that actually set up a rational process. So, Representative Dowd, I hope that you're actually paying attention because it is not our job to interfere. It is to say yes or no. To say no means you're not a rubber stamp. To say yes might mean that you think the contract's a good idea. The rubber stamp has nothing to do with it. It's whether you think it's a good idea or a bad idea. And instead of offering amendments that interfere, why don't we just debate the merits of the contracts as they stand and then decide if it's green or red? Debate and then vote. That's what our job is.
Representative Simonson, for what purpose do you rise?
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Thank you. Members, I'll make this point again, I guess as many times as I have to, but this is a term and condition of employment. You very simply cannot add to or take away from the contract itself. It's a term and condition of employment. It was negotiated between employers and employees. You do not have the authority to change the terms and conditions of employment in the contract. With respect to silencing our voice, you have a voice. You can debate the merits of the contract, vote it up, vote it down. If you vote it down, it goes back to the bargaining table. It's very simple. You do not have the authority to change the terms and conditions of employment. Thank you.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to offer advice to the body.
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, members, there are tens of thousands of union members in this state that would like us to debate this question. And are we going to stand here and muzzle the ability of people to bring this forward and then rubber stamp the product without the ability to discuss? Or are we going to have those people's voices who would like to see this discussed in this body be heard? If this isn't germane to this bill, which bill would it be germane to? That's what I ask you. Members, vote red on the Speaker's determination.
Seeing no further discussion, again, the question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no or red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 58 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the decision of the Speaker shall stand. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
McNamara moving to amend Senate File 58, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded RA 1320.
Representative McNamara.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This one will lighten things up here a little bit. This one actually is not stepping on the contracts. It's not stepping on something that was negotiated in good faith. This is fixing a really bad injustice where hard-working state employees were unjustly treated. What I'm talking about, members, if many of you had a constituent possibly, we all got the letter, those of you that are in your second term got a letter that asked us to verify if we had dependent coverage. If you remember it, it looked kind of like junk mail. And it came to us, and it actually came to us 3 different times if you didn't fill it out the first or the second time. And what's really sad is even the first, the second, and the third one were all sent regular mail. None of them were sent certified. So we have no record when we asked John Doe, the snowplower, or Jane Doe, the lady cleaning the garbage cans, you never got the paperwork? What's the deal here? If this was done in the private sector, the AG would be suing them for kicking people off their insurance when they had it coming. And a worse injustice, they didn't even go after the people that fraudulently got the insurance. Instead, you know what they made them do? They made them pay up to $6,000 for the last 3-4 months for insurance for their kids that they legitimately had coming, and we can't even prove to them, hand them a piece of paper that shows you got it at your house. You know what? We've got cases where a state employee was on sabbatical teaching a class in Europe. They mailed it to their P.O. box at the college, and when the professor got up back, it was still in the P.O. box. And you know what? They paid out thousands of dollars for insurance. This is very simply something we can do. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for a roll call. Thank you.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a point of order.
State your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, under motions and propositions must be germane, I'd ask that this amendment be ruled out of order because it expands the scope of the bill. I do want to say, Representative McNamara, that I think this is a novel idea, and it would be worthy, I think, of a bill that would be heard through the legislative process that we're all very familiar with. But to add it to the state contract at this point, it does expand the scope of the bill, and I'd ask that it be ruled out of order.
Representative McNamara, for what purpose do you rise?
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, advice. You can rule and let this happen, or you can let a good-working, hard-working state employee, be it a snowplow driver or a maintenance worker, have to have paid $6,000 for insurance for their kids that deserve coverage because our state said you didn't answer something that we can't even prove they got it in the mail. This isn't about what's germane, what's not germane. This is about coming here, folks. Those of you that were going to work across the aisle, if he rules this germane, you're going to get another chance. And if you pull the lever wrong, you're going to turn down that snowplow driver or that poor worker back in your district that didn't get the coverage they deserve. This is about doing the right thing. This isn't about, you know what? We didn't even go after the people that got it fraudulently. The people that got the insurance wrongly, we're not even going after them. We made these people, some of them paying $8,000 for insurance that they legitimately have coming. You know what? You know how we legitimately know they have coming? Read the bill. They have to have already been reinstated. This is a simple one. You turn this one down, you got to go back tonight and face your constituents. And you know what? I'll bet you're getting texts right now from the Ask Me and from me. You know what? They're not telling you to vote against this because they don't want to let those workers down. Do the right thing.
Representative Abler, for what purpose do you rise?
Advice.
State your advice.
And to the Speaker and maybe to Representative Murphy, this is not germane to the bill. It's clearly there, and my advice is that let's just pretend it is. Oh, that's actually, Mr. Speaker, you can turn it to the body if you choose. That's an option you have. It's been used in the past. Representative Murphy, you could withdraw your objection to this. Representative McNamara could withdraw his request for a roll call. And this could just be sent on. The Senate could concur, and these people could be taken care of today. This is one of the reasons we do stuff on the floor, and I think he just thought of it today as an issue. But this is, how do you resolve this? And there's, the budget bills are months away from getting done. And so, Mr. Speaker, my advice is, just with what you have in front of you, defer the ruling to the body and let the body decide. Thank you.
Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice to the body.
State your advice. We're on a point of order, so it would be advice to me, I believe.
Well, okay, Mr. Speaker, I would speak in objection to Representative McNamara's amendment. Simply, today I've heard so many things. Outrageous. It's important to stop what we're doing here. And it's a bad message. This is a bad message to our employees. Representative McNamara, you're right. The snowplow drivers, our state employees are getting a bad message today because we can't pass this off the floor without trying to mess with it. Now, I'm more than happy to work with you, my Senate district partner. Let's get that bill exactly what you pointed out here, that we got to get those folks taken care of on this insurance thing. I 100% agree. Now, I'm single. I don't have a date tonight. I don't have plans, and we live 15 minutes away. And we can keep this up all night, but I'm ready to stay here all night and tell state employees they matter.
Representative Kahn, for what purpose do you rise?
Advice to the Speaker.
State your advice.
Yes, Mr. Speaker and Representative McNamara, this is kind of a really weird time to put this in. This is the laws of 2011. You had all of 2012 to do a bill to correct this. In addition, I remembered this audit was a problem. It was a problem for me because I suddenly had to produce information like that I was married. And if you try and find a marriage license when you've been married as long as I have, it's a real problem. But essentially, this came because of an amendment. I don't remember if it was a Woodard amendment or a Dowd amendment, but it was an amendment from someone in the caucus that was in charge. And that was when it should have been attacked. The audit should never have been conducted, or it should have been conducted with restrictions, and certainly a bill to correct it should have been done in the last session when you were a member of the majority.
Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Kahn, we tried to address this in a conference committee. I know Representative Simon was on that. We would try to deal with this in 2012, and we got great resistance from the administration. We tried to put more protections in place for individuals. We were highly aware of your situation. As we were in conference committee, your situation was brought to light, and we would have been able to have a much better resolution to this issue had we had the agreement and support of the administration.
Having listened to the advice of several members, and having reviewed the amendment and the bill, I find that the point of order is well taken. There's another amendment. Representative McNamara.
I'd like to appeal the ruling of the chair.
Representative McNamara appeals the ruling of the chair.
Ask for a roll call.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative McNamara. Well, the question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no or red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. President. Folks, just so you know, Representative Abler's already told you. Representative Lillie, you and I know it's not germane. This is not germane. No, you're doing this to do the right thing. We were sent here to do the right thing. Those of you can talk about it, and we can say we'll do a bill later, and we could talk about all the other things. The reality is this is a chance to absolutely do the right thing. These people got ripped off by us. They got ripped off by the state of Minnesota. I've got a constituent with 3 children that paid $6,000 for insurance. He's worked for us for decades. Now, I don't know what happened. 3 things were mailed to his house. We say, can you imagine? Not one of them got sent certified. So we went to him and said, you know what? Pony up. $6,000 for the next 3 months and wait for, what do they call that time? Open enrollment. Wait for an open enrollment to come back. This guy's a hard-working state employee. You know what his raise has been in the last 4 years? Like 1%. We nailed him $6,000. You got a chance to do the right thing here. All you got to do is say no to the Speaker's ruling. We come forward. I'll withdraw the roll call at that time, and we just voice vote this thing on and do the right thing. We can't possibly want to rip these people off. You can't say you're going to vote for a contract and then nail some of them for this kind of money. This is so simple. You're not going to be able to go home because I think I had 2 or 3 of them in my district. I got the same 40,000 number of constituents. You guys are all going to go home. Now they're going to know that you voted against them and they don't get their money back that they got coming. This is absolutely about doing the right thing. Stand up. Those of you that are new, you've got them too, because the people you beat had them before you. Please, do the right thing now.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice to the body.
So members, when you rise to advice to the body, you can just talk.
Well, thank you then, Mr. Speaker. I am looking at Representative McNamara's amendment, and here we are, all neatly drafted. This could so easily become a bill introduced and heard in the next 4 weeks before the first committee deadline. If this is a good idea, and it sounds like there are a lot of people on the floor who think it is, then let's do it the right way. Let's do it the right way. Introduce it as a bill. Take it through the committee process. Have it heard. Let people testify. If it's the right thing, it'll pass. We don't need to do it by sticking it into a state contract. We could, but we don't have to, because we're in session. We have more than 4 weeks before the first committee deadline. The language is all drafted. It can move through the process easily, and we can do the right thing, and we can do it the right way. Members, please uphold the ruling of the Speaker.
Representative Simonson. Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Great idea. Wrong place, wrong time. We cannot add to the terms of the contract. We cannot subtract to the terms of the contract. I actually like this too. I'd support it as a standalone bill. Keep in mind what we're doing here. Today I guess I could offer an amendment that would change the pay increase for these employees covered by these contracts to 5% per year. That would feel really good. And we'd like to do that. We'd like to do that for those employees. But the fact of the matter is we couldn't. As much as we want to support something, as much as we think it's a good idea, we cannot change the terms and conditions of employment. Thank you.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, we throw around the what's right and what's wrong. And I just remind you what's outside the halls here in the Capitol that we pass law in and debate by a great politician, a great public servant. Nothing is politically right which is morally wrong. Yeah, you may be politically right. It's not germane, so on and so forth. But what is morally wrong is not to allow this amendment of McNamara's, Representative McNamara's, to get in. You talk about passing another bill. Oh, we could have a standalone bill and do the kind. We're doing the work today, now. We can get this done now. That kind of debate that kind of thought, in my opinion, is a waste of time, having a standalone bill. The amendment is before you now. We have the opportunity to pass this and do the right thing, the right thing for these folks who have got gypped off by the state. So I would recommend you be very careful of what you do. Let's do what was morally right, not politically wrong.
Representative Lillie.
Mr. Speaker and members, I rise for advice to the body. We have a lot of new members here, and I think, how many is there? 27? 20? 25? 42. Not even close. Not even both sides of the aisle, of course. I forgot. So anyways, when I was a freshman, Denny McNamara was one of my teachers. Like you had Representative Gavel and Representative Simon. So Representative McNamara, so he knows how this place works. He knows how bills work, and he trained me. So he told me not to get up very often and talk, so I took that advice. And he told me how bills worked, and he trained me. And so I know he knows how this stuff works, so he could really, I think it's a good idea. I think there's agreement. And, Representative McDonald, I've got a lot of, yesterday I had the Norwegian sweater on, but, I got a lot of Irish in me too. And, all the shenanigans. And, I think of Representative Lawrence Solberg and all the trees we're killing today and stuff, but we really should vote on this bill, and a lot of these are great ideas, and you guys know, like Representative McNamara, you know how this stuff works. You can do a bill. It's kind of cool. You can have it in there. I don't know if you introduced one. You can nod if you did or you didn't, and it could become law. It's kind of neat. So I just offer that advice.
Representative Abler.
Mr. Speaker, advice to the body. Thank you. The Speaker made the right ruling. This bill is not germane. This amendment is not germane to the bill. And he did his job. And his job up at the podium is to make his best judgment about what's right and what's germane and what's not. And I got to give him credit. He made some rulings that surprised some people over there, which I got to give him credit for that. That's healthy, and we should get to vote no on things we just don't like and not just call them germane. So I commend him for that. He did his job right in this amendment. This is not germane. His job was, is it germane? No. Let me tell you about bills that get done and bills that don't get done. When Governor Ventura was here, we overrode him just for fun. And I held off a while, but then later on, he got overridden more than anybody in the recent history in terms of stuff. Whatever we felt like as a legislature on a bipartisan basis, we just did. And it was kind of handy. I overrode Governor Plenty one time, and that wasn't as fun as it seemed at the time. But you'll discover, especially the freshmen, and I discovered quite well, that if the administration doesn't support something, like if you remember from Representative Holberg, didn't support the work of this project, that a standalone bill might actually get vetoed, without any disrespect meant. But the governor and the administration, he lets his administration commissioners do their jobs. And so this may be the only chance you get. And so I'm just telling you that the Speaker did his job, and now we have the ability to do ours. And it's not always Republican versus Democrat. Sometimes it's House versus Senate, or legislature against the governor. And so what you have, why this bill, why today? This is a non-vetoable bill, which is why I want to keep it quite clean. And you didn't want those other amendments to go on, and I understand that. But this thing here, we actually all agree on. And so I'm going to suggest to Representative Lillie and the others who suggested we should maybe not do this today, that they should rethink that and then vote to overrule the Speaker, which he will not take in as any affront. He'll know he did his job, and we're doing it with a smile on our face, helping out these people that we all like. I had to get my marriage license too, and it cost me $9 or $11 to prove it. I said, how about a picture? I got our wedding picture. We still live together. No, I had to get the thing. But if you never got the letter, that's wrong. So I'm not going to tell you what to do, except I urge you to be kind to our Speaker, acknowledge his good ruling, and then rule how we want and run our House on these rare occasions when it makes sense. This is one of those. Thank you.
Representative Kahn.
Well, further advice. One of the problems with doing some things like this is that sometimes they're totally wrong. Turns out the Commissioner of Administration is not in charge of CGIP. Turns out the Commissioner of MMB is. So we would pass law that was just doing it on the fly like this. We would pass something that's totally wrong. It would probably get into all kinds of extra complications. And again, going through the process, I think, would have probably corrected that as opposed to doing it as an amendment right now. So again, I suggest we uphold the Speaker just for the reason that we don't pass garbage on the floor of the House.
Representative McNamara.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Representative Kahn, members, I hope you just listened, because unfortunately, it's already 2013. Next year's 2014. I don't know if there's going to be another bill that this passes, but I can tell you what the literature pieces are going to say. One of your colleagues said it was garbage that a state employee that paid $6,000 for their insurance for their 2 or 3 kids for the months of October, November, December. I don't know what groceries they didn't buy for those 3 months. I don't know what else they gave up. But $6,000. You know how much the average state employee makes? Not much more than us. 40-some grand. $6,000. And you know what we're saying? Representative Simonson, it's the right thing to do. Representative Lillie, it's the right thing to do. One more over here, it's the right thing to do. You know what? Do the right thing. Get with the program. Represent your constituents. For once, stand up. Stand up. My goodness gracious. What did you come here to do?
Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard a lot of discussion about whether this is germane or not. I'm not hearing a lot of discussion about it being germane, but I'm hearing a lot of discussion about this being the right thing to do. And I don't know about you, members. I think every one of us, though, came here to do the right thing. Representative Simonson in the back mentioned that we can't change the conditions of the contract or the language in the contract. This doesn't do that. All we're doing here is hitching a ride on this bill. And if it's the right thing to do, seems to me we ought to do it. And I haven't heard anybody stand up yet and say, you know what, this is the wrong thing to do. It's a bad policy. I've already seen an email in my inbox from one of the members on the DFL side of the aisle in the last few minutes saying that they gave this to staff to draft. My recommendation to that member, let's do the right thing right now. If you think this is a good policy, press the red button. Let's do it right away. Let's tell the employees that we came here to do the right thing. This isn't politics. If you haven't gotten to know Denny McNamara yet, he's one of the best members in this body. He doesn't play politics. He can be a good example of doing the right thing. So let's take the opportunity to do the right thing here today. Vote red on this, and let's hitch this amendment along for a ride.
Representative Kahn.
Mr. Speaker and members, you can't do the right thing when you put the wrong language in what you're trying to do. You have the wrong commissioner. It is not a viable piece of language. Go back and write a bill that works, and you'll find that there's a lot of support. You can't do the right thing with the wrong language in the statute.
Representative Schoen.
Mr. Speaker, members, and thank you, Representative Doubt, for pointing out that I'm willing to work with both sides to get this bill drafted. And yes, I know Representative McNamara is a good man. But you're playing politics here today. Every one of these amendments is politics on our state workers, and they know it. Let's get to the contract that they bargained in good faith. And let's show our state workers finally some respect after a few years.
Representative Mahoney.
You know, I've been here 15 years. And the irony of you standing up and talking about doing the right thing by state employees. What's the definition of irony? Your side of the aisle, standing up and saying, do the right thing. After holding up contracts for time after time, after literally trying to put amendments onto a signed, sealed, and delivered labor contract, this is irony. And to quote somebody today, one of my mentors from long ago, this is outrageous, as Representative Carruthers would say. It's outrageous that you sit here and say this kind of stuff to us about how public employees are treated. Because your behavior on this particular issue is outrageous. This is all because of something that you put into effect 2 or 3 years ago. I don't think anyone on this side of the aisle voted to demean public employees by saying, go get your marriage certificate, go get your birth certificate, prove who you are. That was your idea. So members, I could talk a little bit longer, but I'm going to sit down and be done with it.
We don't have to take Representative Mahoney's last advice, but Representative McNamara.
Well, I think that would be a very good idea, but let's clarify, Representative Mahoney. I don't think I'm the only state representative that had a conversation with Governor Dayton's commissioner. Governor Dayton's commissioner. All I asked him was, send a certified letter to them so they know they got it. You wouldn't do this. The Attorney General would be suing the private sector if they did this. If I, as a landscape contractor, told my employee, I mailed 3 letters to your house and you never verified your dependent coverage, so I am going to make you pay $6,000 for 3 months. We can argue all about the past. We're here today, Representative Mahoney. We have an opportunity to do what is to correct an injustice. We can point fingers. Was it a Republican-led legislature that put forward the idea that people that actually are getting dependent coverage should be real dependents? If you want to criticize us for that, that was our idea. Absolutely was our idea. Let's verify. And you know what? A whole bunch of them mysteriously dropped off. And you know what? We didn't even go after them. We didn't even send them a letter, members, to say, you got insurance, you're not getting it now, it must have been a mistake. Which of your dependents weren't eligible? Can we figure it out so we can get the reimbursement the state of Minnesota's got coming? We didn't even do that. Instead, we went to the people that didn't fill out the form and said, pay up.
So members, the question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no or red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 59 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the ruling of the Speaker shall stand. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Woodard moves to amend Senate File 58, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A1.
Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this amendment would do, no surprise to this body.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Representative Winkler, state your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, the amendment is not in order under State Statute 179A.22 and State Statute 3.855. This is directly interfering with the substance of the contracts, and I would ask that you rule the amendment not in order.
Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know that this was an issue that you'd brought up before, Representative Winkler. So we can amend this to include notwithstanding that particular statute.
Members, I've listened to the advice on this issue on 2 prior rulings, including one situation where that language was added. And based on the previous rulings and review of this amendment, I would find that the point of order is well taken.
Mr. Speaker, I would appeal that ruling.
Representative Pepin appeals the ruling of the Speaker.
I'd like to roll call it.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, the Speaker has ruled differently on different amendments. He just sort of admitted that. On the A11 amendment, he ruled that the point of order was not well taken, and subsequently he has ruled that the point of order is well taken. So we have inconsistency, and so I guess I would argue that under custom and usage of maybe an hour ago, that this point of order should be ruled not well taken. So members, I would ask for a red vote.
Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, the point of order that was not well taken previously was on Rule 3.21. It was not germaneness. It was not under the state statute sections or the Mason section. So therefore, custom and usage, if you will, or the precedent of the Speaker so far this session is that these amendments are not out of order under the sections that I cited.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Winkler, that's not what I remember. Both A11 and A12, the point of order that you raised was the reference to Chapters 179A and 3.855 saying that they were not part of the bill, therefore they were not, that it was out of order. So they were both, you raised the same point on both amendments.
Seeing no further discussion, the question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. Representative Anderson also votes no. There being 70 ayes and 58 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the ruling of the Speaker shall stand. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Benson M. moving to amend Senate File 58, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A9.
Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I withdraw the amendment.
Representative Benson withdraws the amendment. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 58.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. Representative Runbeck. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members. As we contemplate our votes on this bill, I would like to remind us all that of a couple facts, a couple points. I remember hearing the incredible description by our state economist Tom Stinson when he talked about the tremendous loss in income that Minnesotans suffered as a result of the recession a few years back. He called that loss of income staggering. A staggering loss of income across all Minnesotans, amounting to something like $10 billion that were wiped out, just gone because of the recession. And, I wonder how the private sector is doing since then. Yes, everyone is starting to come back, starting to experience return of their incomes. Are they back to where they were before the recession? I guess I don't know. I don't have that information. But I think it's safe to say that as a result of the stimulus funds which came to Minnesota, as a result of the contract negotiations that have occurred over the last 4 or 5 years, that our state employees have done very well. They did not lose jobs. They did not suffer cuts in income. They did not suffer cuts in fringe benefits or pensions. It's been a very secure, a very safe, a very well-remunerated position to have. And so it seems to me, for that reason alone, that this increase that we are seeing, $250 million, and it's not complete apparently yet. There's more to come, and perhaps Representative Lillie, if he would yield, could tell us really what the total will be when all is said and done.
Representative Lillie will yield. Representative Runbeck. Representative Lillie.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Runbeck, in the first, wrapping up this biennium in 12-13, the cost is $70-some million, and then going forward into 14-15, I think it was $250 million.
And Mr.
Representative
Speaker,
Runbeck.
Representative Lillie, then the contracts that remain to be signed, what will they add to the 14-15 total?
Representative Lillie will yield. Representative Lillie.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Runbeck, I believe these are yet to be determined since they haven't been closed yet, but I would imagine that they will similarly affect, show the same results. So,
Representative Runbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do we take a guess, perhaps? Another $50 million, another $75 million, something like that, perhaps? At any rate, it's a big number. And again, especially in light of the fact that incomes remained stable, pensions remained stable, fringe benefits were stable through a long period of time when Minnesotans were hurting. So I'm going to be voting red. For that reason, I think it's too generous. And secondly, because there's a flaw. There's a big flaw in this. The state employee is not paying for their individual health insurance premium. It is well past due for this change to occur. My constituents, and I don't know how many of them know this, but it's something that they certainly ought to know, that there's a tremendous double standard. It's not right. It needs to be fixed, and for that reason, I think we all ought to be voting no. Thank you.
Further discussion. Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was one of those members that were on the subcommittee for employee relations up until it was just ratified by the committee. We had a lot of serious concerns because during the 2-year period, we went repeated times to talk with the folks that were in negotiations and relayed to them our concerns about simply negotiating contracts that really didn't change the way we negotiated contracts for the last number of years. No new changes regarding pay for performance, and like we have in the private sector. Nothing at all in terms of health insurance, in terms of whether or not a single employee paid anything at all towards their health insurance premium. There was a study that was conducted by the Taxpayers Association that was funded by the State Chamber of Commerce that came out just before negotiations in 2010 that looked at 41 of the some 1,300 occupation codes but covered 9,000 of the 50,000 state employees. And that study, fairly significant, statistically valid, showed that 70% of the state workers in the state of Minnesota received greater than 7% more than their private sector counterparts. Add to the fact that since 2008, how private sector employees have undergone significant reductions in all levels of benefits and pay, and we have a significant imbalance. We should be concerned about the taxpayer, and I understand that our state employees are tax-paying individuals, but we need to be concerned about all taxpayers and concerned about the direction that if we continue on, the total imbalance of state employees versus private sector. Add to that what's going through now in the exchange bill with about 84 people that will be added to the rolls if the exchange bill is passed without any further amendments, that has provisions to allow for 150% of what we currently pay our executive salaries. Caps at 95% of the governor's salary will be expanded to 50% more than that. We'll have directors on this board and in this organization that will be getting paid $150,000, $160,000. And folks, if you don't understand what's going on there, is the next time we have negotiations, it's usual in negotiations that we have what's called Me Too. So we're setting ourselves up for, we didn't change at all. I think state employees are hardworking individuals, but the fact is we didn't change the way they get paid at all. It's just the same old, we just kicked the can down the road. No pay for performance. When you look at, in negotiations, what we found out is, we talk about this, by the way, these contracts, 50% of these employees will get 10% increases over the life of this contract. 10%, 3.5% step increases and a 2% cost of living increase. I don't know too many people in the private sector are going to be looking forward to a 10% increase over that amount of time. We should have serious concerns. So folks, we need to take a hard look at it. We've got an opportunity here tonight to say no, go back to the drawing board. They're only 5 months away from restarting negotiations. And it's been already said here tonight that 50% of these employees during this same time got raises. Only the people at the top steps didn't get any. Vote red.
Representative Johnson B.
Mr. Speaker, members, I rise for a red vote on this bill, not because it's a bad bill or because it's too expensive, because of technicalities. As Representative Winkler pointed out, by this law, they cannot amend the bill. This bill was amended on January 31st. They added 5 sections to this bill in the Senate. If they had, instead of adding it, just ran a separate bill, it wouldn't have been a problem. But because of what Representative Winkler had stated, you cannot put an amendment on this bill. And that's what your side of the aisle has been saying all afternoon. You cannot amend it. Because it was an amendment, it would be illegal by the letter of the law for us to pass this. Please vote red.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. There are a few of us in the chamber who used to be public employees that were covered under these contracts. There are some of us who are still working in the public sector. I think about the folks that I used to work with, and I'm looking at the clock, and it's near the end of the day, and I bet there's probably some of them that are on the road out helping people. I'm betting there's some of them that are still back in the office, even though their time was done, making sure they get that job done, trying to help somebody out, trying to issue that license, trying to make sure that the job gets done. So those are the folks I used to work with. Now I see them, I saw them a couple summers ago when we were out and the doors were closed and they were there. I see some of them when I drive into the Capitol as they're driving to work, where they're going to work because they're there. I see constituents, went to a blood drive 2 weeks ago. There was a state worker there who was organizing the blood drive. Now the first question as she was putting me into the line for the blood drive was, what about those contracts? What about those contracts? So this contract and this bill has been out there for a period of time. And yes, there will be another contract coming up. But the hour is late on this contract. And a green vote for the contract is the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do to get the job done for those people who get the job done for us, who get the job done for the people of Minnesota, serving our state day in, day out, every day of the year. Thank you.
Representative Lillie. Oh, Representative Carlson, I'm sorry.
Mr. Speaker, I wanted to respond to some of the earlier comments relative to fringe benefits, and in the course of doing that, encourage a yes vote on this contract. But a number of years ago, I was in the negotiating team with my employer for 3 contracts. And you kind of go through that period where you're exchanging ideas and views and so on. And in the end, you decide what the cost of the contract is going to be. You agree on that. And then the second step in that process is how much might go toward paying for health insurance, how much may go for salary. And so when we talk about the fringe benefits, you have to keep in mind that that was a negotiated item and it was part of the bottom line, the cost of the contract. And so when you point to different fringe benefits and say, well, it's wrong that this or that fringe benefit be granted, well, keep in mind it might have gone into salary, it might have gone into something else. Those are decisions that are made at the table and we should support that.
Representative Newberger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I want to encourage all of you to think about the private sector employees today. I spent the last 35 years in the private sector, and these people are paying more and getting less for their health care. And we pay nothing. We get it for free as individuals. This needs to be reevaluated. These contracts need to be looked at a second time. We hear a lot of discussion about being fair. I think we need to be fair in this. And for me not to speak on behalf of the private sector would be wrong. So I encourage you to think of those that are going to have to pay more and get less as we get it for free. This is wrong. Thank you.
Representative Driscowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'd encourage you to vote no on this bill. This bill ratifies a group of contracts, of union employment contracts, and 5 of those and 2 other employment contracts that are a result of, as I mentioned, approaching 2 years of negotiation, the longest amount of time in the last 20 years that we have record for, by far, is represented in the negotiating period that we saw with these contracts. It was interesting as we went along through the process, and Representative Lillie and I are good friends. We rarely agree on the subcommittee on employee relations, but the process went along, and suddenly we came to an end in August of last year when the process between management and the labor unions said, you know what, we're not going to incorporate the reforms that you asked us to put in. And we asked them over and over again, we would like pay for performance like the private sector has. We would like the public employees to pay a portion, just 10%, $45 a month, like the private sector does at the rate of hundreds of dollars a month. And they said no. And they came back and asked us to provide interim approval, and we said no, go back to the drawing board and bring us back contract proposals that have those reforms in so that we can start to bring the public sector to be in a match with the private sector. But there was an election, and the chairs of the committees and the speakership and the majority in the House all changed. And suddenly we see us going forward on the same path we were before, basically rubber stamping these contracts as they come forward through the process and providing for increases. Representative Benson mentioned it. Some of these employees, when you add the autopilot increases that these groups have been under over the last 18 months and the 2% COLA that is indicated in these contracts, nearly 10% increase over 2 years. Nowhere in the private sector is that happening. You're seeing cuts. You're still seeing cuts. I've got employees in my district who have lost their jobs or had 30% reductions in their total compensation, had their health insurance taken away in order to keep the business going, in order to stay employed if they kept their job. But no, we don't do that in government. As a matter of fact, I asked during our deliberations in August, I asked the folks there, how many times have public sector workers taken a pay cut? Never. No one could remember the public sector employees taking a pay cut. But everybody in here, in your districts, the private sector, they have. And those folks are paying this bill, $250 million, $250 million that we're putting on the taxpayers' back into the next biennium. Rubber stamp it. That's what you're going to do. Muzzle the minority and rubber stamp the bill.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be short. As Representative Carlson said earlier, these are negotiations, and when we're talking contracts and we're talking fringe benefits, they're all pay. They're all part of their pay. And there are people over here with the watch on me, but they're all part of their pay. These employees, to keep their health insurance cost premiums down, they took up to $1,000 a year out of pocket more that they're going to have to pay for their insurance. We're arguing the bill we had for $50 a month. They're already paying more than that out of pocket to keep their health insurance and keep the premiums low. They took cuts in the benefit sets. They took cuts in increases in their out-of-pocket pay, and so they're already got skin in the game. But this is all part of negotiations that you sit down at the table when you're negotiating a contract. You trade this for that, and that's what they did here. So these people are not getting a big increase. They're getting a 2% increase, but they're also taking a cut in what they got more money out of their pocket, which is a cut in their pay. So they did take a cut in pay, Representative Truskowski.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I think it's really important for our state workers to pass this contract as it's been negotiated between the administration and their representatives, the union's representatives. And today is an opportunity to move our state forward. And while we had some debate and back and forth over amendments, it is really the closing arguments that I'm hearing from members here that reminds me that our Republican friends are sending the message to Minnesotans that on this Valentine's Day, I heart the status quo. You know, 2 years ago, you threw up roadblock after roadblock and gave Minnesota the longest state shutdown in state history. And as a result, 19,000 Minnesotans didn't get a paycheck for that inaction. Those workers will not recover any of the $65 million in lost wages due to the shutdown. But today we have an opportunity to move forward with a fair and reasonable contract for middle-class workers. Middle-class workers who work hard, keep us safe day in and day out to make our state a better place. These contracts are modest. They're fair. They're negotiated and passed. They're more fair or more modest than what was passed under Governor Pawlenty. And it's the first raise these workers have had in 3.5 years. Passing this today is the right thing to do, and I'm pretty certain we're going to do it. And I think it's important that it's time for us to lift up the roadblocks. Minnesotans want us to move forward. I urge a green vote.
The author of the bill, Representative Lillie.
Mr. Speaker and members, thank you for this hearty discussion. It's kind of taken us some places. I guess I'm a little disappointed. I hope in the future that we can consider moving things through bills and through the process. At the end here, I rise to say, to speak for our workers of the state and tell them thank you. I grew up in small business, and I just think you hire good people and you treat them right. And these are part of our team. You know, there's a lot of folks around here that are coaches and other things. You know, they're part of our team, and we need to treat them right. And nobody's getting rich. So when you look at the janitor in the state office building that's getting a bump perhaps, or 2%, and you know, maybe they'll pat you on the back and say thank you for this vote tonight. But it's going to make a difference in their lives. And they show up every day. I could go through a whole list of who they are around the state, but please vote green.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 83 ayes and 44 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, Murphy E. for the Committee on Rules, pursuant to Rule 121, designates the following bills to be placed on the calendar for today for Monday, February 18th, 2013. House File 19, 87, 90, and 141.
Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there's no objection, we'll take action on these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail. Announcements. Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, wondering if the Majority Leader would yield for a question.
She will yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Madam Majority Leader. Again, just wondering if we've seen additional bills from the Governor's budget in bill form that we can, if those are ready for introduction, and if we've received those.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Dowd. Yes, we are starting to see them. In fact, we're going to meet in rules as soon as we're done to move the K-12 finance bill, the governor's proposal, to Representative Marquardt's committee.
Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If she would yield for another question.
She will yield. Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Madam Majority Leader. So it's my understanding we've received the Ag Finance Bill, the Higher Ed Bill, and the K-12 finance bill. The rest of them are still MIA at this point.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Doubt, we also have received the tax bill.
Representative Doubt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Huntley.
Mr. Speaker and members, I'm just reminding the members of the Health and Human Services Finance Committee that we will continue our meeting at 6:50.
Representative Ward, Joanne.
Mr. Speaker and members, point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
As members, you may know that there was a random act of violence in my district on Monday evening. A young boy, Devin Ariel, was killed after his mother picked him up from daycare in Oakdale. Devin's mother and another woman were also injured in the random shooting. My thoughts and prayers go out to the families affected in this tragedy. I ask for a moment of silence in memory of Devin and prayers for his family.
Representative Carlson.
Speaker, a bit of good news for members of the Ways and Means Committee. I just want to remind you that we will not meet on Monday, but I can assure you that we'll be making that time up later.
Okay. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The Legislative Audit Commission met today. Tomorrow in your inboxes will be a request for ideas for topic selection for the program evaluation process. It will have a timeline of that. If anybody has any questions, maybe we could just have the Audit Commission members raise their hand, and Representative Beard, Representative Erickson, Representative Holberg, Representative Falk, Representative Simon, and myself. If you have any questions about the process, feel free to contact us, and we'd like to get topics for program evaluations.
Further announcements. Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Rules Committee will meet immediately following session in Room 118 of the Capitol. And, Mr. Speaker and members, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3 p.m. Monday, February 18th, 2013.
Representative Murphy moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn until 3 p.m. Monday, February 18th, 2013. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. Representative Murphy.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Murphy moves that the House do now adjourn. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, no. The motion prevails and the House stands adjourned until 3 p.m. Monday, February 18th, 2013.